America loves a big project. $100 billion rail lines, mega malls the size of small cities, battery factories that were going to reshape entire industries. The ambition is real. The execution is frequently something else entirely. These are the top 10 megaprojects in America that will probably fail by 2027. Number 10, the Gateway Program, Northeast Corridor, New York to New Jersey. The Gateway Program is a collection of infrastructure projects designed to repair, replace, and expand the rail connection between New York Penn Station and New Jersey, which is the single most congested rail corridor in the United States. The centerpiece is a new 2-track tunnel under the Hudson River to replace the existing North River tunnels, which were severely damaged by Hurricane Sandy in 2012. And are operating at reduced capacity with aging infrastructure that dates to 1910. The Gateway Program has been in some stage of discussion, proposal, planning, environmental review, or political negotiation for over a decade, roughly as long as any individual tunnel project has ever been discussed without the ground being broken. The full scope, which includes the new Hudson River Tunnel, rehabilitation of the existing North River tunnels, expanding Penn Station's capacity, which is already the busiest train station in North America, and replacing the aging Portal Bridge over the Hackensack River, carries a price tag in the range of $30 billion. Federal support for the project has lurched between commitment and withdrawal across administrations, depending on which party holds Washington and what the political relationship between the federal government and the state of New York looks like in any given year. The Trump administration withdrew support for the project during its first term, citing a dispute over the funding split between federal and state contributions. The project's advocates spent years rebuilding that federal relationship, secured Biden-era commitments, and watched the political environment shift again. The Frederick Douglass Tunnel component in Maryland, a separate but related Northeast Corridor project, received $5.9 billion in federal funding for a 4-track modernization. That project has begun, which puts it ahead of the Hudson Tunnel, which as of 2026 was still trying to close its full funding gap. The existing North River tunnels are more than 110 years old, damaged, and running far more trains than they were designed to carry. A failure in either tube would essentially paralyze rail travel between New York and New Jersey, a scenario that would affect hundreds of thousands of commuters per day. The infrastructure carrying those people has been approaching that failure scenario for years, while the funding arguments continue. Number 9, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter Program. Calling the F-35 a failure is complicated, because by most definitions, it has not failed. It is flying. It is operational across multiple branches of the U.S. military and with allied nations around the world, and it represents the most advanced multi-role fighter currently deployed in significant numbers. It is also, by any measure, the most expensive weapons program in the history of human civilization. The F-35's estimated lifetime cost, according to a 2024 Pentagon Watchdog report, has reached approximately $2 trillion. That encompasses development, procurement, operations, and maintenance across the program's projected operational life. The unit cost of each aircraft has been a persistent source of controversy since the program's inception in the 1990s, when the fundamental pitch was that a single advanced platform serving all 3 military branches would produce economies of scale that made the whole thing more cost-effective than buying multiple specialized aircraft. That argument has not aged especially well. The program has been plagued by technical problems, cost overruns, and schedule slippage throughout its development across more than 2 decades of active work. As of 2025, the F-35 was still flying with various software and hardware limitations that the program has been working to resolve across multiple block software upgrades, with the so-called Technology Refresh 3 modernization program running years behind its own schedule. Lockheed Martin, the prime contractor, and the Pentagon have been in sustained disagreements about who bears the cost of modifications and improvements, a dispute that has resulted in deliveries being paused at various points and payment negotiations that consume years of management attention. In April 2026, Congress was actively debating cuts to planned F-35 procurement numbers as part of broader defense budget negotiations, and a strategic reassessment of whether the original production volumes the program's economics assumed could be sustained. Any significant reduction in buy numbers would raise the per-unit cost further, compounding the problem that the program was supposed to solve. The F-35 will not stop flying by 2027. What will not exist by 2027, and has not existed for a very long time, is the version of the F-35 that was promised in the original program proposal. Number 8. Wolfspeed's North Carolina Semiconductor Fab. Wolfspeed was positioned as one of the domestic semiconductor manufacturing success stories that the CHIPS Act was designed to create. The company, which specializes in silicon carbide semiconductors used in electric vehicles and power electronics, broke ground on a massive new fabrication facility in Siler City, North Carolina, with the expectation that it would become a major domestic supplier for the EV transition. In September 2025, Wolfspeed filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, a significant event for a company that had been held up as one of the domestic semiconductor manufacturing success stories that the CHIPS and Science Act was specifically designed to enable. The company emerged from that restructuring in the same month, with a reorganized balance sheet and continuing operations at the Siler City facility. The pre-negotiated nature of the restructuring meant the factory itself never stopped running, which is the best possible outcome for a manufacturing facility. But the path to financial stability for a company making multi-billion-dollar capital investments in advanced manufacturing while demand for its primary product, silicon carbide semiconductors for EV powertrains, has grown more slowly than the industry's peak enthusiasm projections had assumed, is genuinely narrow in ways that a cleaned-up balance sheet does not fully resolve. The company received a nearly $700 million tax refund in December 2025 and refinanced its debt in March 2026, both of which provide runway. The Siler City fabrication facility is operational. Whether the underlying market demand for silicon carbide chips will grow fast enough to justify the scale of capacity Wolfspeed built, particularly given that the automotive EV transition is proceeding more slowly than the 2021 projections assumed, remains the central question. Number 7. Gotion's Michigan battery plant. Gotion, a Chinese electric vehicle battery manufacturer, announced plans in 2022 to build a $2.36 billion battery plant in Green Charter Township, Michigan, creating approximately 2,350 jobs in a rural area of the state. Michigan offered substantial incentives to attract the investment, including around $175 million in state grants and tax incentives. The plant was positioned as exactly the kind of domestic battery manufacturing capacity the United States needed to reduce dependence on foreign supply chains for EV components. By October 2025, the project was entirely dead. Gotion abandoned the Michigan plant, citing a combination of local opposition and national security concerns that had accumulated and intensified around the project since its 2022 announcement. Local residents in Green Charter Township and the surrounding Isabella County area organized sustained opposition from virtually the moment the plant was announced, motivated by concerns about Gotion's Chinese ownership structure, its connections to the Chinese Communist Party, and what critics described as the national security implications of locating a Chinese-owned battery manufacturing facility in rural Michigan. Those concerns gained significant federal traction as U.S.-China economic and political tensions escalated through 2023 and 2024. Congressional scrutiny of Chinese-connected manufacturing investment in the United States intensified broadly, and Gotion's project became a specific focus. The state of Michigan moved to claw back approximately $24 million in grants that had already been dispersed to the project. Gotion, for its part, filed suit against Green Charter Township, alleging that the township's conduct constituted improper interference with its investment and seeking damages. The township, that had been promised 2,350 permanent jobs, ended up with a lawsuit and an unbuilt factory. The communities and states that attracted Chinese manufacturing investment with generous incentive packages in 2021 and 2022, when domestic battery supply chain development was a bipartisan priority, discovered that the political environment in which those deals were struck had fundamentally changed by the time the projects were supposed to break ground. Number 6. Ford BlueOval SK, Kentucky battery plants. Ford Motor Company and South Korean battery manufacturer SK entered a joint venture in 2021 to build two massive battery gigafactories in Glendale, Kentucky, a combined 86 gigawatt-hour capacity that would have supplied Ford's electric vehicle lineup and represented one of the largest domestic battery manufacturing investments in American history. The twin plants were branded BlueOval with a projected construction cost of approximately $6 billion for the Kentucky facilities. In December 2025, Ford and SK On formally dissolved the BlueOval SK joint venture. Ford took full sole ownership of the Kentucky battery plants. The dissolution was driven by a financial reality that neither partner had fully anticipated when the joint venture was announced in 2021 with significant fanfare as part of a wave of American EV manufacturing investment. The EV market had not grown at the pace that the 2021 projections assumed, and both companies were absorbing losses that made continuing the joint venture at its original scale untenable. Ford's EV business unit, Model E, lost $5.1 billion in 2024 and was projected to lose an additional $5 billion or more in 2025. The company recorded a $6 billion write-down in the fourth quarter of 2025 specifically for EV-related losses and assets. SK On was simultaneously facing its own financial pressure as EV battery demand growth decelerated globally and the South Korean company's own balance sheet was strained. Neither partner had the incentive or the financial position to sustain a $6 billion joint construction commitment under those conditions. The Kentucky plant closed in February 2026, pending restructuring under Ford's sole ownership. Battery production at the facility has been delayed until 2027 at the earliest. Full vehicle production from EV models the batteries were supposed to supply has been pushed to 2028. Ford's entire electric vehicle strategy, including the number of models, the timeline, and the scale of battery manufacturing investment required, has been restructured to reflect what the EV market actually is, rather than what it was projected to be in 2021. The BlueOval City complex in Tennessee, which is a separate facility, not part of the dissolved joint venture, continues under different circumstances. The Kentucky plants are the most visible piece of collateral damage. Number 5. New York City 2nd Avenue Subway. Phase 2. Phase 1 of the 2nd Avenue Subway opened on January 1, 2017, connecting the Q train to 96th Street on Manhattan's Upper East Side. Approximately a decade behind schedule and at a cost of roughly $4.5 billion for 1.7 miles of tunnel, making it among the most expensive subway construction in the world per mile at the time of completion. New York celebrated it as a transit milestone. The MTA celebrated it as proof that New York could build subway infrastructure when it committed to doing so. Phase 2 of the 2nd Avenue Subway would extend the line from 96th Street North to 125th Street, adding 3 new stations at 106th, 116th, and 125th Streets, and ultimately serving Harlem and connecting to existing services. It has been on the MTA's capital program for years. The current estimate for Phase 2 is approximately $6.6 billion for roughly 1.5 miles of new subway. That comes to approximately $4.4 billion per mile, exceeding even Phase 1's extraordinary cost. As of 2026, the project is still in an environmental review and planning phase, the stage of development that precedes actual construction by several years of regulatory process, public comment periods, and design refinement. The MTA's ability to fund its current capital program, let alone its aspirational future one, has been consistently strained by a combination of operating costs, debt service on previous capital spending, and the gap between what the system needs and what the political process will fund. The congestion pricing program that was supposed to generate $15 billion in capital funding for the MTA was suspended in June 2024 by Governor Kathy Hochul, who cited concerns about its economic impact on commuters in the months before an election. The suspension created an immediate $15 billion hole in the MTA's planned capital program that has not been filled with an equivalent alternative funding source. The MTA has scaled back some projects, deferred others, and is managing its capital plan against a funding reality that is significantly smaller than what was planned. Phase 2 of the 2nd Avenue Subway appears in capital plan documents with projected completion years. Those documents are plans. They describe a desired future. The distance between a desired future and an funded, contracted, under construction present is, in New York City transit infrastructure, typically measured in decades and billions of dollars that do not yet exist. Number 4. The American Dream Mall, East Rutherford, New Jersey. The American Dream Mall was supposed to be the future of retail, an entirely new category of destination that blended entertainment and shopping in ways that would be immune to the e-commerce disruption killing conventional malls. When it finally opened in October 2019, nearly 2 decades after it was first proposed as Xanadu in 2003, after multiple developer bankruptcies, construction halts, roof collapses, legal battles, and a name change intended to leave all of that behind, it was pitched as a revolutionary entertainment-first destination. The 3.5 million square foot complex was built around an indoor ski slope, a Nickelodeon Universe theme park, a full NHL regulation ice skating rink, an indoor water park, and a retail lineup that included Saks Fifth Avenue, Primark, and dozens of other brands. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who had watched the property sit unfinished for years during his tenure, once called it the ugliest damn building in New Jersey and maybe America. He was not the most enthusiastic endorser. The financial structure supporting American Dream included $1.1 billion in tax-exempt bonds issued by New Jersey, with $800 million backed by pilot payments in lieu of taxes tied to the mall's assessed property value. The state of New Jersey effectively bet $1.1 billion of public money on the project's success, representing, according to the Urban Land Institute, the largest public subsidy in New Jersey state history. The reality has not matched the investment at any meaningful level. Sales at the mall reached $650 million in 2024, an 18% increase over the prior year, and genuinely the strongest year the mall had achieved since its opening. It was also approximately 1/3 of the $2 billion in annual sales that the 2017 feasibility study had projected as the basis for the entire financial structure. A mall generating $650 million in sales when $2 billion was the underwriting assumption is not on a path to making its investors whole. The mall's assessed property value was cut nearly in half in 2025. Dropping from $3.3 billion to $1.65 billion in a July 2025 tax court ruling, roughly the value the judge determined the complex could actually support given its revenue performance. That reduction directly cut the pilot payments on which the $800 million in municipal bonds depend. In February 2026, a bondholder group led by Nuveen LLC sued East Rutherford and American Dream's parent company, Amerim LLC, in Bergen County Chancery Court, alleging that the borough and the developer had colluded to secure an artificially low property valuation and cut the bond payments owed to investors. Municipal Market Analytics Managing Director Lisa Washburn described the bond structure plainly. By that point, it's just game over. The pilot bonds have balloon payments due between 2027 and 2050. If revenue lags and reserves deplete, maturity extends to 2056, with no guarantees after. The mall is open, entertainment is operating, and some retail is present. The financial structure beneath it is an ongoing legal dispute, and the $2 billion revenue projection that justified the whole enterprise remains approximately $1.35 billion per year out of reach. Number 3. Brightline West, Las Vegas to Southern California. Brightline West is a privately funded high-speed rail project that would connect Las Vegas to a terminal in Rancho Cucamonga, California, where passengers would board Metrolink for the final stretch into Los Angeles, across a 218-mile route running in the median of Interstate 15 through the Mojave Desert. The project was announced with considerable enthusiasm as the first true privately funded high-speed rail project in the United States, a proof of concept that market demand alone, Las Vegas to Los Angeles being one of the most heavily traveled routes in the country, could justify the investment without public operating subsidies. Brightline broke ground on April 22, 2024 at the future Las Vegas station site and was originally targeted for operational service in time for the 2028 Los Angeles Summer Olympics. That 2028 target was abandoned by April 2025. The project is now targeting late 2029, which is also not an especially firm date. As of March 2026, Brightline was still waiting for a $6 billion federal loan needed to fund the construction phase of the project, while simultaneously pursuing a $4 billion loan from a banking consortium. Neither had been secured. The total estimated cost of the project has risen from an initial $9 billion to $20.1 billion, a revision that Brightline West's executive director attributed to rising construction market costs. Brightline's parent company, Fortress Investment Group, also owns and operates Brightline's Florida passenger rail service, an existing rail line connecting Miami to Orlando that opened in 2023. An Ernst & Young financial audit of Brightline's 2025 operations explicitly raised going concern doubt about the company's ability to continue operating, stating that the company does not currently have the liquid funds necessary to service its debt and meet such other obligations. That is not a hedged assessment. That is an auditor telling investors and lenders that the company has a genuine ability to continue problem. Brightline West is structured as a separate entity from Brightline Florida, with separate financing and a separate organizational structure. Parent company financial distress does not automatically transfer to a subsidiary, but a company whose primary auditor has publicly raised going concern doubts about its parent is not in the strongest possible position to close a $10 billion financing package for a construction project that hasn't yet laid track. Whether Fortress Investment Group's financial management of the Brightline Florida situation has any practical effect on Brightline West's construction timeline is the question that the construction schedule will eventually answer. The Las Vegas station parking garage is taking shape. The I-15 corridor surveys are complete. The track itself has not yet been laid, and the company has not announced a date for when track laying will begin. 44 months to late 2029. Track laying hasn't started. Financing hasn't closed. The 2028 Olympics have already been missed. Number 2, California High-Speed Rail. California High-Speed Rail may be the most thoroughly documented ongoing infrastructure failure in American history. It occupies a singular category, a project that has consumed more than $18 billion in public funds over more than a decade of active construction work without producing a single mile of operational track or carrying a single revenue passenger. The project was approved by California voters in November 2008 via Proposition 1A, which authorized $9.95 billion in state bonds for a high-speed rail system connecting San Francisco and Los Angeles in under 2 hours and 40 minutes at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. The total estimated cost at the time of the voter approval was approximately $33 billion. The projected completion date was 2020. It is 2026. No tracks have been laid. No trains have run. Not one passenger has traveled 1 mile on California high-speed rail. The cost estimate has risen from $33 billion to $126 billion by one accounting, or to $231 billion by another, depending on whether you are looking at Phase 1 alone or the comprehensive build-out. The project's peer review committee chair, Lou Thompson, called it a dead end. In March 2026, California State Senator Tony Strickland told Fox News Digital, "This is a project that will never be built, and everybody in this building knows this project will never be built for the people of California." Representative Vince Fong told 60 Minutes, "We're now in 2026. There are no trains. There's no track laid. It was a complete bait and switch." In July 2025, the Trump administration's Federal Railroad Administration terminated approximately $4 billion in federal grants to the California High-Speed Rail Authority, concluding after a compliance review that the authority had failed to meet its obligations in 9 distinct areas. California initially sued to recover the funds. In December 2025, California Attorney General Rob Bonta's office quietly dropped the lawsuit without prejudice, despite a federal judge having recently rejected the Trump administration's bid to dismiss the case. The funds are gone. The California Legislative Analyst's Office warned in 2026 that the project could run out of money before completing even its first Central Valley segment. The 171-mile stretch between Merced and Bakersfield that is the only portion actively under construction and which the authority itself acknowledges would not be profitable once operational and therefore incapable of repaying what has been spent on it. Inspector General Ben Belknap told California legislators in March 2026 that the project's current funding stream may not keep pace with construction expenditures. "The longer we wait, the closer we get to a funding crisis that delays the project," he said. Congress, in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2026, permanently rescinded an additional $929 million in previously appropriated funding for the project, compounding the July 2025 termination of $4 billion in federal grants. The math, the timeline, the political consensus, and the engineering reality are all pointing in the same direction. California high-speed rail is the mega project that refuses to formally die, sustained by a combination of sunk cost fallacy at the institutional level, political stubbornness from officials who approved it and cannot bring themselves to acknowledge the full scope of the situation, the continued employment of thousands of people on a project that still has active construction, and the fundamental fact that no elected official in California wants to be the one who signs the termination papers on a project California voters approved. That document would define their political legacy. So the project continues, one funding crisis at a time, toward a version of completion that bears increasingly little resemblance to what was originally sold. Number 1. The everything else, America's infrastructure gap. The honest answer to the question, which American megaproject will probably fail by 2027, is that the category of American megaproject failure is so consistent and so well documented that selecting 10 individual entries almost misses the point. Research on megaprojects across all categories, transportation, energy, construction, consistently finds that roughly 90% of major infrastructure projects exceed their original cost estimate, typically by significant margins. The average cost overrun for a large infrastructure project is not 10 or 20%. It is routinely 50% or more. And for rail and transit projects in the United States, overruns measured in multiples of the original estimate are well documented. Oxford professor and megaproject researcher Bent Flyvbjerg, who has studied hundreds of major infrastructure projects across decades, has noted that the fundamental problem is not technical, it is political and psychological. Projects are systematically underestimated to get approved. Then the cost reality emerges during construction, when stopping is more expensive than continuing. He calls this survival of the unfittest. The projects that get built are the ones that made the most optimistic promises, not the ones most likely to be built efficiently. America's infrastructure gap, the difference between what the country's roads, bridges, transit systems, water systems, ports, and energy infrastructure need in investment, and what is currently funded across all levels of government, is estimated by the American Society of Civil Engineers at approximately $2.6 trillion over the next decade. That is not a partisan talking point. It is an engineering assessment based on conditions of existing assets, projected deterioration rates, and the cost of bringing them to acceptable condition. The projects on this list represent a fraction of that gap, concentrated in the highest visibility category of megaproject ambition, where the numbers are large enough to generate press releases and the failures are public enough to generate congressional hearings. The deeper problem with American megaprojects is not any individual failure. It is the systemic pattern that makes individual failures predictable before the first shovel hits the ground. Projects are announced with optimistic cost figures and ambitious timelines because realistic ones would not survive the political process required to approve them. The gap between what is promised and what is delivered is not an accident or a surprise. It is, as Bent Flyvbjerg and other researchers have documented across hundreds of projects over decades, a structural feature of how large infrastructure projects get funded and built in democratic political systems. A feature that America has shown no consistent ability to redesign. Most of the projects on this list will eventually produce something. The Gateway Tunnel will probably get built. Some version of California's rail system might eventually run. Brightline West will either get its financing or not. The question is never really whether the idea was good. The question is always whether the institution, the politics, the funding, and the timeline are aligned well enough to actually deliver it. For most American megaprojects, the honest answer to that question, provided in advance, is probably not yet, and provided in retrospect, is usually not quite what was promised. If you found this one worthwhile, hit like and subscribe. There is a lot more infrastructure history, financial disaster, and American ambition failing upward where this came from. The list will be longer by the time the next budget cycle closes.